Resuming debate?
Resuming debate.
Resuming debate.
Welcome to the Resuming Debate podcast. I'm your host, Garnet Jennis. Up until yesterday, father of four, but now father of five. So pleased to share with you, for those who didn't see the announcement other places, that our fifth child was born Augustus Anthony Jennis last night at 4:52. Crazy evening for me. We had the birth, and then an hour later I was voting on the motion to confirm. In the case, I voted against confirming the emergency measures by the Liberal government. So we're recording this the day after the birth, the day after the Emergencies Act vote took place, and I'm very pleased to be joined by a guest who will be new to listeners, but certainly not new to me. Arnold Viersen, Member of Parliament for Peace River Westlock, another Conservative MP, and Arnold and I think I can reveal, are roommates in Ottawa. That is, we share lodging when we're away from our families in Ottawa. Arnold, great to have you on.
And thank you, Garnet, and congratulations on the new little Gus.
Thank you very much. We have a lot of conversations between the two of us about a wide variety of issues, and I know oftentimes we have people from other parties, we have experts, but I thought it would be great to be able to share. There's a couple different things going on that fit within Arnold's particular area of expertise, and so glad you could join us and share a little bit from your work and your experience. To start with, and we're going to get to talking about your riding and the trucking convoy and sort of the significance within your riding of that whole issue and the Emergencies Act that we're dealing with in Parliament right now. But before that, today, the day we're recording, the day we're going to release this, is Human Trafficking Awareness Day. This was an initiative that you played a big role in actually having recognized. You've done a lot of work on human trafficking. So tell us a bit about how you got into the human trafficking issue and why it's something that you care about, and why how kind of it came to be that February 22nd was this day of awareness.
Yeah, like Garnet said, we were both elected back in together back in 2015. So known Garnet for about that long. I was chosen early up on the private members bill number. Unlike Garnet, I've had the opportunity of pushing a private members bill through, and so back in 2016 I introduced a motion in the House of Commons called M47, which called on the government to do an investigation or a study on the impacts of online sexually exploitive material. Through that study and through advocating around that particular issue, I came in contact with a lot of organizations that were combating human trafficking right here in Canada, and so that kind of introduced me to this whole anti-human trafficking world. Human trafficking is a heinous crime that is profitable and growing right here in Canada. 90% of the victims of human trafficking are Canadian. They're born here. Most people think that human trafficking is something that happens in other places and comes to Canada, but the vast majority of human trafficking cases in Canada are of Canadian, typically girls, women and girls. Again, 85% women and girls, and then of those, 50% are Indigenous. So it is a problem right here at home. I always say human trafficking is happening within 10 minutes or 10 blocks of where you live. And that, I say it all the time, and it typically holds true. Like, we keep having more and more cases all the time, and it's from downtown city cores to very far remote places like high level Alberta. We've had cases in all of those places. So back in 2017, I got together with a number of members of Parliament from across different parties, and we built a All Party Parliamentary Group to end human trafficking and modern day slavery. Through that initiative, I've made some friends in some of the other parties, and friends with some independent senators, and that's probably been one of the coolest things about the All Party Group, is the relationships I have with the senators through that group. But nonetheless, one of the initiatives we were working on was getting February 22nd recognized as the National Human Trafficking Awareness Day. several of the provinces had already recognized February 22nd as the Human Trafficking Awareness Day, and so we thought we'd just align Canada with some of the provinces so that we can do it at the national level as well. And so over the last 3 years, I think, every January we would get behind. So normally getting a day recognized takes a private member's bill or something like that. But we thought when we had the all-party support for it through the all-party group, if we all worked it from each particular angle, we should be able to get it through, regardless of the fact that none of us actually had a decent private member's number. And through some innovative committee work, which Garnet, you've played a role in this as well, through passing motions at committees and then bringing them back to the House of Commons through concurrence motion, we were able to get this passed, recognizing February 22nd as the National Human Trafficking Awareness Day. So after trying to get unanimous consent in the House for 3 years in a row, last year we were able to get this through. So today is the first National Human Trafficking Awareness Day.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so it was after February 22nd last year that the concurrence motion happened. So just, I know we've got a kind of mix of folks who listen to this podcast, some of whom are kind of engaging in politics to a greater extent for the first time, and some of whom are Hill staffers, follow the process closely. But for those who don't know, private members' bills are based on a random draw, right? So that's what Arnold's talking about with the numbers. And I have unfortunately done poorly in each of the last 3 parliaments in terms of the random draw, where I've been further down the list. Arnold has done better than I. But there's a few tricks you can use if you don't do well in the private members' bills draw to still get an initiative forward. One is to start a motion at a parliamentary committee and have it then referred from the committee to the House of Commons. Another is to start something in the Senate, and if it passes the Senate, it goes to the House of Commons and jumps the line. So with the organ harvesting bill that I've worked on in the past, we've done the Senate route. I know, Arnold, you've worked on a number of human trafficking related initiatives trying to get bills started in the Senate, but then also you're talking about bringing it from parliamentary committee. So it pays to know the rules, right? I mean, this is part of what we're talking about often in our sort of plotting around putting issues forward is what are the various levers that you can pull to get an idea moving forward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's fascinating. It's particularly what the all-party group that we formed with. We took it from, it's a UK initiative. We literally just, the UK Parliament, our kind of mother Parliament, has a lot of these all-party groups, and we took they have an all-party group to end human trafficking, modern-day slavery in the UK. We took their constitution and we constituted here in Canada the same way. So just like currently one of the things that we're working on is a supply chain reporting bill. We call it the Kids and Slaves and Supply Chain Bill, and we're running it on several tracks, trying to get it to be passed. Because in a minority parliament, you never know when the parliament falls. So we've got the bill is introduced in the Senate. An independent senator is running it through the Senate as we speak, and Marcus Pawlowski, a Liberal MP, has introduced it in the House as well. And we're going to try to run it through the House kind of simultaneously. So we'll see it's kind of a race, I guess, to see which one we can get going through first. And that does doing that as well just puts some like internal pressure on the system to make things move. So it's been exciting to have the all party group in. I always want to just make a little distinction as well. The difference between all party and non-partisan, and some people conflate those two issues. And I'm a hardcore partisan, but there's big value in having all party work on these kinds of things. Right. So
walk out that difference a bit more, because I like where you're going with that. Do you mean non-partisan is sort of where we all take our party hats off, mm-hmm. but all party is where we come in as partisans and probably on these issues, and I am part of these cross-party coalitions on international human rights issues often, where you kind of say, well, I can push it forward in this way because I'm part of this party. You can do your thing a little differently because of where you sit. But if we all push on the same initiative from different directions, we can actually get it moving forward.
Yeah, so particularly around the like forced labor side of things, the all-party push on this allows us to prevent us from stumbling into accidents. So, for example, we've had draft bills come before our organization, and the NDP will say, well, the labor unions will never, like this language here totally triggers the labor unions. They will never get them on side with this. And then, so we, like just one or two words changes and it makes it more nuanced, and the labor unions don't have a problem. I remember the one time it was like a specific, like, targeting of the extractive industries, right? And I just said, like, this is going to be a non-starter for Alberta when you're targeting just like one industry. Like the oil patch is we've kind of got a hair trigger on being accused of things. So don't single us out, kind of thing. So that those kinds of and there's sometimes blind spots for the other parties, right? Like when I'm drafting a bill, I'm not big on, like, I haven't spent a lot of time inside of how a labor union operates, and the language and the lingo that labor unions operate in doesn't mean anything to me. So yeah, if I use a particular phraseology or something like that I think is pretty benign, it might send alarm bells ringing inside a labor union world, kind of thing. And the NDP guy can come along that's on our committee and say, well, let's just change, like, don't soften that down, Arnold, that, like, this is what when you say these words, this is what the labor member or the union member is hearing, right? Oh, right. Okay, yeah. So it's something that I hadn't considered, right? So that's where, like, the all-party piece has been. And then the other piece just around this particular bill is that I managed to get in our platform that we would support supply chain reporting that was a part of our platform.
You're talking about the Conservative Party platform from the last election,
Yeah, and the Liberals had the similar language in their platform as well. So
and supply chain reporting means that basically companies that are sourcing products from other parts of the world, they have to be more accountable about what's in their supply chain. And this is the idea that you don't want to have child labor, forced labor involved in producing products that are then sold at the Canadian market. Yeah,
so one of the examples that that both you and I have worked on petitions on this is around the Uyghur forced labor issue, right? So that's kind of one of the kind of motivating factors that's driving a bill like this, is that the U.S., for example, is basically just a certain area in the world, Xinjiang province. They're saying if it's coming from Xinjiang, we're not taking it.
Yeah, or you have to prove that it doesn't have forced labor.
Yeah.
So it's a sort of reverse onus.
Yeah. So that's sort of supply chain reporting bill will help sort that kind of stuff out.
Yeah, it's really interesting that the sort of the description you're giving there of some of the language differences in terms of triggers. The policy may be the same, but there are certain ways of talking about things that are different from party to party. So if you can have this all-party dialogue that has this almost this translation function. The coalitions you're building on human trafficking, though, they're not just cross-party, right? There's also sort of some cross-cultural dynamics. Like my sense of the human trafficking, the sort of anti-human trafficking, human awareness movement is that you've got a lot of interest among in the active Christian community in those issues, and you also have a lot of issues in like the maybe the traditionally left identifying secular feminist world as well. So it seems like kind of an interesting issue where you've got a common agenda, but two very different, and probably more than just those two, but those are two that I can think of, very distinct kind of cultural communities. And so how have you found even the bridging of those cultural divides as well as the party divides?
It's a bridging, or it's a common cause, I suppose, or co-belligerence. Like co-belligerence, I think, is the term I like to use the best, because there's like a high level of suspicion typically, but we all are there for fighting the same enemy, And so it's my initial motion M47. I had the Newfoundland and Labrador Feminists and Allies endorse it, and the Evangelical Fellowship of Canada. Those two groups probably won't find them in the same room too often, but that's a reality. So the fight on human trafficking is definitely, the energy is definitely evangelical Christians, the Catholic Christians. Are pushing the issue fairly dramatically, and then the radical feminist movement is pushing it fairly hard. And then on the labor trafficking, you get kind of labor union push. So you get these three groups that wouldn't necessarily end up in the same room any other way in their life, but on this issue they do.
Do you think there are other benefits that come from getting those groups together? Like if you start with just as co-belligerents, we're both fighting the same thing, do they start saying oh well, hey, what about this issue? If we have more support for childcare, is that going to help you achieve your pro-life objectives? Are there other kind of collaborations that come out of it, or does it tend to just, let's not talk about anything else and let's just focus on this one thing?
I can't say as it's gone from human trafficking to pro-life issues fairly quickly. That's probably a large divide of which we don't get there. But I got into the war on human trafficking through trying to combat pornography use in Canada, and so there is kind of a dance between the anti-human trafficking world and the anti-pornography world that I try to take people along. And now I don't. The folks dedicated to fighting human trafficking, that's a fairly a large group of people. The folks dedicated to trying to eradicate porn use in Canada is a smaller group, but a lot of them come from the first group. I think. So
explain for people that maybe wouldn't have heard this line of reasoning before what the connection is between those two concepts. Human trafficking, a lot of that is sex trafficking, people being abused, coerced, forced. What's the relationship between that and
pornography use? Yeah, so the biggest thing is as we've seen from the whole Pornhub MindGeek debacle, is that many of these girls, their images are shared without their consent, and they're underage. The human traffickers are basically just in it for the money, and however they get the revenue stream going, they're happy to use it. So they're often, when they're trafficking somebody for sex trafficking, they're trafficking them for literally selling them on the streets, but they'll also be shooting porn videos and putting them up on Pornhub and getting a revenue stream from that as well. So that's part of the initiative. Think before you click. Is your porn habit contributing to the exploitation of women and girls in Canada? And the answer to that is likely, very likely.
So the point you're making, I guess, is that just a lot of the pornography that people would consume is non-consensual, and that a lot of the places where this content is hosted are not doing any kind of meaningful verification whatsoever.
Yeah.
And you were part of an initiative to really go after Pornhub, and that was cross-party as well. I mean, there was lots of activity from people in other parties. Nate Erskine-Smith, who's been on the podcast before, and some NDP members were.
Charlie Angus is Charlie Angus from the NDP, Nathan Erskine-Smith from the Liberals, and myself. We had a fairly major study at the ethics committee just over a year ago. And interestingly, I was working on this bill before that, but there's 14 recommendations come out of that report from the ethics committee. And I've been working on a bill, I call it the CEASE Act. It's the Stop Internet Sexual Exploitation Act. And it would mandate that companies maintain records of that the people depicted in the videos consent to being in the videos, and the people are of age, so that it would basically reverse the onus from the police having to prove that the person doesn't consent and the person is underage, to the company that's hosting the video having to prove that they have a document saying that they consent and this is their age. So it just basically flips the onus from the police having to prove the age of the individual and the consent of the individual, or lack thereof, to the company having to prove that. So that's the CEAS Act. I'm hoping to get that introduced here shortly again in this Parliament. Yeah.
Good stuff. Well, it's great to hear about the work you're doing on the human trafficking front and be able to share some of that information. I want to go on to some of the other immediate issues of the day here, but just one last question on Human Trafficking Awareness Day and the work around this. If people like what they hear, if they want to support the work you're doing in some way, is it your personal website? Do you have like a hub for some of this work where people can go?
Yeah, so right on my MP website, I have a whole section dedicated to fighting human trafficking. Basically, there's 3 or 4 things you can do. Host an event, host an evening, bring out a speaker. There's lots of people that would like to speak. Put on an event that you have hosted at your church or at your home or something like that, and just educate people on the fact that human trafficking is happening within 10 minutes of where they live. Support local organizations. There are many survivor-led organizations clear across the country. They need time. They need your time and they need your money, so help support them, and get involved in politically. Make sure that your members of Parliament, all your elected officials, know and understand that human trafficking is happening, and put it on the ballot. Essentially, make it a ballot issue for you. Ask people about it.
Yeah, I think this is one of those issues where you won't get a lot of people that stand up and disagree, but it's still very hard to get people to make it a priority. Yeah. So every party says they're going to make reforms around supply chain accountability, for example. That doesn't mean that the bill will actually get put forward and debated and passed, because there's competing priorities, and it's fine to say we agree, but then getting it on the agenda. And for private members' bills, it's a massive headache to get through all these hoops and hurdles to get it passed, even if when it comes down to the actual vote, people are going to agree. So talk to your MP about it. What Arnold said. Raising awareness about the problem and encouraging people to support, just expediting these measures, putting things on the agenda is it's really, really important. So I want to talk as well about you. I've been here in Alberta participating remotely in what's been going on as a result of the growth of my family here, but you have stopped by to record this kind of on your way back from the airport back to your riding. So I want to hear about kind of what you're observing in Ottawa around the fact that now the any kind of presence related to the Convoy protest has been cleared from around Parliament Hill, and we just had the vote last night on the government's proposals around the Emergency Act. But maybe just I want to set the stage a little bit with this. Our country is urbanizing, right? Most people who are listening to this likely live in larger urban centers. Your riding is probably in some ways because it's a vast rural riding, culturally very different from just the experience of most Canadians today. Tell us a bit about your riding, and then about kind of what the Convoy's significance was to your constituents in particular, and how that might have been different from how it was perceived by other people in other places.
Yeah, that's a big topic. So the riding I represent is called Peace River Westlock. Peace River is a 7,000 person town in Northern Alberta. Westlock's about a 4,000 or 5,000 person town in Northern Alberta. The two towns are not representative of the entire riding. The riding is 100,000 square kilometers. It takes to drive from the northern part of the riding to the southern part of the riding. It takes about 6-7 hours. To drive from the east part of the riding to the west part of the riding, it takes 5 hours. So it's a big chunk. It's, I think, top 10 largest ridings in the country. I always say to everybody, we do the forestry, farming, and fracking. And all three of those involve driving big trucks, so that's pretty normal. operation. And I guess that that's a cultural, probably like a big cultural difference is that, for example, where I go to church, come out of church and stand around and talk with folks after church, my like circle of friends essentially, I would say I'm the odd man out that I don't have a license to drive a big truck. I'm just thinking about it now. Like if I go around the circle, I would say that probably 2/3 of them have a Class 1 license and can drive a big truck. It doesn't mean they own one, but they are probably all have driven a big truck in probably the last couple of months, kind of thing. Mm-hmm. So a big truck is not an intimidating thing, nor is it a oddity for where I come from. And so that for me, the convoy coming to Ottawa, all those big trucks being parked on the main street right in front of Wellington Street, right in front of the Parliament buildings, the smell of diesel fumes in the morning. These are all common sounds, sights, and smells of Northern Alberta. Stop at any major gas station along the major highways that I drive to get around the riding, and you meet the same people. They've got their reflective armbands on their jackets permanently stitched on there because that's a safety precaution it's part of their safety gear for their job. They're walking around in rubber boots, insulated coveralls, that kind of stuff. You meet these people every day at the gas station, no matter where you are in Northern Alberta. But these are all quite oddities for Ottawa. I was having quite a bit of fun with it. Like you'd be walking around Ottawa, just between the Parliament buildings there, or our house, or going for dinner or something like that. And I just say to some guy, "Hey, where are you from?" And he'd be like, "Oh, I'm from Camrose, Alberta." How did you know I wasn't from here? And it's like, well, you dress completely differently. Like we can see this from a mile away that you're not an Ottawa person. You've got reflective armbands on your big Helly Hansen jacket, and you're wearing work boots or rubber boots, kind of thing. It's like, I can see you from a mile away, right?
So do you think, part of the response of many people in the city was, I think, instinctively to feel a fear of the unfamiliar. There were, I don't mean to sort of diminish the fact that, streets were being occupied and things, but, if people had looked more like they were from Ottawa as opposed to people from your part of the country, that didn't mean that. Most of them came to protest with very, peaceful intent, I think, but there was a cultural clash at the heart of this, right? Which was you had people from, in many cases, people from rural Canada who felt like they were being left behind and ignored by policymakers that had come to Ottawa to have their voice heard, and they were unfamiliar in lots of ways to that city. And I know for us as Western Canadian MPs, especially, my riding is much less rural than yours is. I've got a little bit of rural, but it's very close to the city. It was like it didn't feel the same way to you because this is just this is normal.
There is a story. It was interesting because I read it in the news, but I also heard the story from the truckers' side. So the truckers had like a compound set up at 200 Coventry Road, where they parked the trucks kind of like they circled the wagons kind of thing, right? So they had the trucks kind of parked in a kind of a square, and then in the center of the square there was just like an empty parking lot, and they had a big tent where they were feeding everybody. They kind of like a soup kitchen going on there, and we were handing out water bottles and that kind of stuff there. And a journalist walked in, so they had like basically by the driveway they had an opening, and they kind of had like a security perimeter set up. And a journalist walked in and started taking pictures inside the compound there, and like it made all the truckers like really uncomfortable because they could just immediately tell she wasn't one of them, right? They said like, people were walking around with their phones taking videos and pictures all of the time. That wasn't a rare thing. It's just they could tell right away that she wasn't one of them, right? She's dressed differently. She carries herself differently. Immediately, they just went over there and asked her like what she was doing there. They were increasingly frustrated with the coverage that they were getting.
Yeah.
And so they spotted her from a mile away, in the same way that I could pick out somebody that wasn't from Ottawa walking down the sidewalk, and I could spot them from a mile away. They could spot somebody that was like a journalist that was even maybe trying to blend in from a mile away. And so then I heard that story from the trucker side, and then I got to read about it in the news. It was the same story, but from the journalist side, and how she was intimidated and threatened, and which it was the truth. Like, I don't think that it's not fake news. Like, they were asking her what she was doing there, why was she taking the picture, but like both sides of that situation were feeling intimidated and frustrated.
Yeah. And you mean to say she wasn't being threatened with violence or anything, but they were just kind of confronting her and saying, what are you doing here? And she was, there was maybe they weren't intending, I don't want to put words in your mouth.
There was like a tension there, right?
Yeah.
It's that there's the journalist was there trying to get like an inside scoop on what this was, but she wasn't making it, because she wasn't making it clear who she was with or what.
Right.
And they were asking her like, why are you here?
Yeah.
Are you a journalist? Which organization are you with?
Yeah. All
these kinds of things. And she reported that as they're hostile to the media.
Right.
And it's just an interesting, when I got to hear it from the other side, they were just like, are you the police? Are you trying to infiltrate this? What like they were trying to maintain their own like civil order inside their own circles.
Yeah.
And just because of the culture difference, they could spot her from a mile away, even though she was trying to blend in.
Yeah. All right. Well, let me just jump in. I mean, I think that's some good background in terms of where things have been. Let's kind of move forward to just the last week, right? The Prime Minister's decision to kind of go from 0, being largely absent, to 100, that is bringing in the Emergencies Act, and then all the things that sort of flowed from it. What was the response of people in your community to those events, and what was your take on kind of how things unfolded in Ottawa?
Well, I have to say, the polling is telling us that 7 out of 10 Canadians are watching this all, which is unprecedented. Like, rarely do people pay attention to federal politics, and so this trucker convoy and the end of the lockdowns, end of the mandates kind of stuff is being paid a lot of attention to by Canadians. So much so that when we put forward our opposition day motion for the government to come up with a plan on ending mandates, I've never received so many emails in such a short amount of time on an opposition day motion. Like, rarely do we get a stream of emails on anything that goes on in Parliament, and I think overnight I had like 1,000 emails in my inbox. So people are paying attention. The Emergency Measures Act, I'm convinced is unnecessary for the situation. There was, while the Wellington Street, 3 out of the 4 lanes were blocked off with semi-trucks parked on it. There was no damage to property that I seen anywhere. I could easily walk from my office to Parliament Hill and get into my seat in the House of Commons. My path was not impeded upon at all. Getting to and from work, driving in and out was working reasonably well. And it's pretty hard to make the argument that Wellington Street is essential infrastructure or critical infrastructure, given the fact that not that many years ago they were talking about making Wellington Street a pedestrian-only street anyways. So the truckers did that to the Wellington Street, essentially. The other thing I also point out is that when there was an injunction brought in from the courts to end the honking, all the trucks quit honking. So the first week it was pretty noisy. The trucks were on their horns a lot. But then the courts put an injunction on the horn honking, and then the horn honking pretty much went silent. But yeah, I describe it a lot like these American football tailgate parties. That's kind of the vibe that you were getting on Wellington Street. There was barbecues. Everybody seemed to have a barbecue there. The music was playing. They're generally having a good, like, bouncy castles were set up. That's kind of been the so while it was definitely perhaps an inconvenience for some people who live downtown, there was no fires being set, no windows being broken. There was much less chaos than after a Vancouver Stanley Cup failure. And we've never imposed the Emergency Measures Act for even that. So I lived in Vancouver back in 2008-9, and remember the craziness that went on after the Vancouver Canucks failed to win the Stanley Cup.
Yeah, there were some instances of blockading of obviously critical infrastructure in the context of borders, and we can get back to some of the events in Ottawa, but I think, like, my feeling was that there were a lot of people that were part of this convoy movement that wanted to protest peacefully, but that a very small number were blockading borders and things. I mean, that seemed to really be a betrayal of what was being undertaken, and it brought a lot of this into disrepute.
Yeah, I guess the only thing is like the border blockades were ended before the Emergency Measures Act was brought in.
Yeah, or kind of ending, right?
Yeah.
So the Windsor Bridge blockade ended before, and I think the Coots one ended within 36 hours or something. So
yeah, they were on their way. The blockades were being taken down essentially, and it was just, I guess, a little bit interesting as well is that the truckers, from what I heard, the truckers were intending to do a slow roll. They were intending to just kind of clog traffic up but keep on moving
around Ottawa,
or all of them,
yeah, okay.
all of them,
yeah.
And to some degree the police then diverted and stopped some of these convoys, and that kind of, because it's interesting, every capital city in the country was having these truck convoys. I know right here in Edmonton, the last 4 weekends there have been big convoys of trucks and cars heading to Edmonton and to the legislature, and the police haven't been impeding those. They've been folks are staying in their vehicle and driving around and honking their horns, and by Sunday morning there's no one left, but then the following weekend it showed up again. So I don't know what's particularly different about Ottawa and the borders in terms of policing measures, but it does seem that something stopped those convoys, and once they were stopped, the guys got out of their trucks and started having a party.
Yeah.
So there's lots of debate, and there's probably going to continue to be lots of debate about policing measures and what the police did right and what the police did wrong. But fundamentally, all of it comes back to this: the spark that lit this fire was the imposition of vaccine mandates on cross-border truckers, of which even the Trudeau government tells us over and over again that 90% of them are vaccinated. Well, if 90% of them are vaccinated, and all of our hospitalization rates and all this kind of stuff are going down, why are you imposing this vax mandate on such a small amount of people that may not make much of a difference, but did cause a massive uprising across the country? This convoy took a week to get to Ottawa. Like, we knew it was a thing for a week before it got to Ottawa. In the spring of in early 2020, there was the rail blockades, and we've seen the government send out like an army of cabinet ministers to go and talk to whoever they could talk to. And I remember specifically Mark Miller, going to Northern BC and sitting down with hereditary chiefs from the Gwich'in First Nation and that seemed to like diffuse the situation, and we got the railways going again. And in this case, they had a whole week of watching the convoy come across, and there was no efforts on the behalf of the government to understand what was the frustration and to dialogue or soften their position or come up with a plan to end the mandates or any of these things. It was calling them a fringe minority, calling them names, and generally trying to make them out as a bunch of racists and bigots.
Yeah. And do you see that as like just coming out of pre-existing stereotypes about your community and your part of the country, that like it was easy for the Prime Minister to sell this image of, you know, of people who drive trucks as being a certain kind of people, when in reality, as we've talked about, the protest was more diverse and you know, had a lot of people that were you know, coming with absolutely no criminal intent. They just were concerned about their livelihoods. I mean, was the Prime Minister playing to stereotypes in a way that that maybe he accuses others of doing, but in this case with a particular target in mind?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what the motivations of the Prime Minister are. I typically, from when most people ask me about it, I typically say that it's the most straightforward answer is that he divides Canadians in order to benefit him politically, and that's typically, and so trying to escalate this to be a significant crisis seemed to be what he was attempting to do. Rather than trying to de-escalate the situation, he was trying to inflame it. That seems apparent to me, that by calling people names, because we've seen this government in action when it's protests that they are more, that's kind of like from their side of the political spectrum. They send out the delegations. They say these people are misunderstood. If only the government would listen to them, we wouldn't be having these problems and all that kind of stuff. We've seen like complete opposite rhetoric with the trucker convoy compared to.
So I had Anthony Housefather on here a couple episodes ago, and at kind of towards the beginning of the convoy, and his perception was that that both sides do this, right? That there is some inconsistency in terms of how people respond to protests if they have sympathy for the underlying cause, right? Because we would generally say in other contexts, you can't give in to people that are breaking the law to try to force a change they can't get through other means. I would still say in the case of those other points, like you need to enforce the law while doing so in a way that respects civil liberties and also trying to understand why people have concerns.
For me, this is the first time my side of the issue has ever rallied like this.
Yeah, that's true. It's a unique experience for us as conservatives, right?
Right. And so I would say that, like I've just said, like Canada's broken a little bit, but whether it's the G7 riots, that's the 57 churches being burnt down, the blockades, the Idle No More, the Black Lives Matter, all of these like big every capital city in the country. What was it? Just a couple of years ago, there's Extinction Rebellion shut down a bridge in the middle of Edmonton during a rush hour. Yeah. Right. What I would have to say to Anthony, which I find Anthony Housefather, I appreciate him in the fact that he is one of the liberals that you can actually have a conversation with. Yeah. But the point is that our people who are driving trucks, working every day, don't have time to go to protests. They typically, and the Liberal government and their response to COVID have taken these guys' jobs away, forced people to get vaccinated when they didn't want to get vaccinated by threat of losing their job, or by threat of not being able to travel, or by threat of not being able to go to hockey games, or whatever that is. And I guess at some point they just say, well, when we watched over the last number of years, we watch the other side operate with impunity. The police don't show up, the army doesn't show up. They block streets, they generally cause chaos, they burn buildings down, they light fires on railway tracks, and there doesn't seem to be anything happen. If we go and block some roads and honk our horns, there's not likely to going to be anything that happens to us. That's essentially the signal that the government has given. And when the government send out an entire army of cabinet ministers to go negotiate with the rail blockaders, when these people don't seem to be getting any action on their issue through regular political means, they've taken things into their own hands. And so it is an escalation. It's the practical joking that gets out of hand, sort of thing, right? It's always going to be one-upping.
Yeah. So I guess if I can say what you said another way, and you can tell me if I'm getting your sentiment right, but that we have to ask the question of how we got here instead of just look at the particulars of the moment, because of course the rule of law is important. And the rule of law entails a bunch of different things. It entails people following the law. It also entails equal treatment of individuals, whether or not they're following the law. If I break the law on a given day, I should be treated the same way by law enforcement as somebody else who looks differently, comes from a different perspective, who also breaks the law. And people who are in positions of power should be held by the law as well, and individuals should have the protection of law. So when people are blockading streets, that's a problem from a rule of law perspective. When people are treated inconsistently, when different kinds of protests are treated differently, when stereotypes are pervade about people who have particular kinds of concerns, that's also a problem from a rule of law, national unity, equality perspective. So how can we address this sort of collection of concerns that all have something to do with national unity, rule of law, and building a unified country that can move forward?
Yeah, I guess in many respects, I suppose that as a member of Parliament, and given that is the place where I work, I just say we need to have confidence that our issues can be aired there, and that we can sort out our political differences via democracy and votes and all these kinds of things. And I think that's a little bit the struggle that Canada is having at this moment is that people don't hear their voice in Parliament, and therefore and watch the other side use these other tactics and say, well, hey, if those tactics are on the table, if those are the rules you're going to play by, we're going to start playing by them too.
Yeah.
Right. If you're gonna blockade a major bridge in the middle of, it's this escalating levels of degrees, right? It's okay, 7 people blockading a bridge in downtown Edmonton for a number of hours. It is one thing. Blockading the borders for a number of days is an escalation of the similar concept. Blockading the rail lines for 18 days. Yeah. Right. We're just going to have to come to an agreement between the right and the left, or however you want to divide it, to just say hey, we will do our politics on the floor of the House of Commons.
Yeah. Well, that's what rule of law is all about, right? It's about us saying that we will resolve our differences within the parameters of law. Yeah. But when you have weakening Parliament, weakening democratic institutions, when you have, talk about rule of law, the Prime Minister and his government refusing to hand over documents that were ordered for production by Parliament, and that's on a different issue. It's not related to COVID, but
100%. Whenever the Liberals start talking to us about the rule of law, it's well, that's sudden. SNC-Lavalin, you're totally flouting the rule of law. Yeah. The documents, but it goes right back to the day they got elected. They just said, we're not going to enforce the First Nation Financial Transparency Act.
Right.
And I was on that committee, Northern Aboriginal Affairs Committee, for 6 years, And every time the minister was there, I asked him, why haven't you repealed the Financial Transparency Act? Like, if you're not going to enforce it, repeal it. But don't let it sit on the books and be unenforced.
Right.
If you don't like the law, fix it. Right. But they were happy to just ignore the law.
Yeah.
Right. So the law is still on the books. It's just not being enforced.
Right.
And so to come around today and say, it's like unlike all of the other issues that we have where the rule of law is being flouted, at least in those instances, they're not admitting it, right? Like the documents and stuff like that. But in the case of the Financial Transparency Act, they're literally like announced to the country that they're not going to enforce that law.
Yeah.
Which completely undermines the rule of law. Is basically just says, like, if you're the government, you get to choose which laws you're going to enforce and which ones you're not.
Yeah. Yeah, that's such a great point. Is how the rule of law is a rich concept that has to be something we broadly commit to, or else we start to bring law into disrepute, and then people start to think that anything is up for grabs. So do you think that what's going to come next is, like, are we going to see more instances of people from the conservative side of the spectrum that are using these tactics more? Are we going to see kind of an escalation from the left saying, well, people on the conservative side did this, so we're going to have our own further protest? Do you think it's going to be like, okay, pause? And because what I've said, right, is I've said it's time for taking that energy and turning it into democratic action. People are asking lots of questions now about how they influence change. We can harness that energy and say, okay, let's put that through a democratic channel. But what do you think will happen? What's the vibe out there?
So my intuition is that the ball is in Justin Trudeau's court. Like his inability to show some humility, his inability to apologize, his inability to recognize that there is authentic opinions that differ from his, is going to just continue escalating things. I think, and perhaps that's what he wants. He may actually want a continued escalation of this. I don't just because then he can assume more power to, like, the fact that he's not revoking the Emergency Measures Act when it's over. Like at this point, can anybody point to a single situation that we're dealing with in the country?
This is the most bizarre thing about it. Now they're saying, this is preempting a possible return of. I mean, the Emergencies Act is not supposed to be preventative. It's supposed to be responding to current emergencies.
Yeah. What is interesting, though, I guess delving a little deeper into the Emergency Measures Act, is that they have to set up this committee, this oversight committee, that has to get set up, and then when it's over, there's a national inquiry that's mandated to come. So perhaps they're trying to stall that for a bit. I don't know what I don't know what their motivations are for maintaining it, because there's, like, with the exception of the Northern Gas Link sabotage and destruction of their equipment up there isn't a situation that's currently ongoing in the entire country. Yeah. So, like, I'd argue that we never needed this Emergency Measure Act to begin with, but given that they imposed it and now are not taking it away, there's no situation that we're dealing with that justifies it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Arnold, it's been a pleasure chatting with you about two very important topics. Your work on human trafficking, as well as just the dynamics around this convoy and some of the things that have happened since then. Any final words? We'll have to have you back on, along with maybe we can have some of these things out with. Oftentimes we have people from other parties on, but I think this has been a really good conversation, delving into just the particulars of your experience and the part of the country you're from. And I hope people listening to this are able to, from other parts of the country, are able to kind of get a bit more of a window into how maybe the convoy was perceived differently depending on where you live.
I guess just one last maybe foray or comment just around the current situation. So I just landed here in Edmonton, just came back from Ottawa. Downtown Ottawa is more locked down today than it has been in the last month.
Yeah.
It is harder to get to Parliament Hill today than it has been for a long time. The police literally have big 8-foot tall fences across the streets. They have only 2 streets open that running east-west or north-south, that you can get onto Parliament Hill. Wellington has got a big gate across it. So what is fascinating to me about all of this is that the cure is harsher than the illness.
Yeah.
My life as a member of Parliament trying to get to and from Parliament Hill is much more inconvenienced today than it was at any point during the convoy. Just given the fact that it is now multiple police checkpoints to get in from the highway to downtown driving, and then just to walk back and forth, you have to walk several blocks in either direction just to get out through the fence. And the businesses inside that area are all shut down right now, which many of them were. A number of them were shut down during the convoy, but many of them, like the Tim Hortons, for example, that's right there, was open and serving the truckers. So, so it is just this situation where the cure seems worse than the illness.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. Well, we are on a break week now, parliamentary break week or constituency work week, I guess. Next week we'll be back in Ottawa, so I guess we'll be able to see at that point kind of what the dynamic is, if everything's just kind of blossomed back to normal. But yeah, it was interesting that this whole issue of even business closures, right? Like some businesses were closed for sure, some were open, and the businesses that were open were getting a lot of customers coming through. As far as
all the downtown hotels were full for a month now.
Yeah.
They haven't had business for 2 years, and then they were full for a month.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah. Very interesting. The mix of different perspectives and experiences, and good to chat with you as always, and share your perspective with the listeners. Leave a review somewhere on the internet, and we'll be back with another great conversation in 7 days.